Soradia Muhammad Yasin. Soradia Muhammad Yasin. Soradia Muhammad Yasin, give answer please. Muhammad Yasin.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is your first session.
Yes, sir.
You were absent for last so many days. Why?
Sir, बाहर गए थे.
But online class you can attend from
Good morning,
anywhere.
sir. Sir, बाहर गए.
Okay, now be regular.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yesterday we started lesson number 12. What is the name of lesson number 12? Name of lesson number
The
12.
silver lining. The
Very
silver
good.
lining.
Yes, the silver lining. Very good. Okay, in the beginning of lesson number 12, we have learnt that the story is about one family and one girl. She was deaf and dumb. What is the meaning of deaf and what is the meaning of dumb? Meaning of deaf and meaning of dumb. Give answer please. Yesterday I explained the meaning of deaf and dumb. What is the meaning of deaf? Don't sit quietly. Give answer please. Are you listening or not?
Yes.
Then give answer meaning of deaf and meaning of dumb.
Yes, sir.
I'm writing in chat box. Deaf means unable to hear. Dumb means unable to speak. So in the lesson talking about one girl who is deaf and dumb means unable to hear and unable to speak. Now remember this thing, deaf and dumb, meaning of deaf and dumb. Okay, these two paragraphs we have completed. Can you see the screen properly?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
સર
So
એના
in,
પછીનું થોડુંક થઈ ગયું છો.
yes. So just as a revision, I am telling the beginning part of the lesson. Here, narrator name Mr. Dhanda. Narrator Mr. Dhanda comes to a private house, private guest house, and he meets a family. Means in family, only wife, husband, and their little daughter. So when narrator Mr. Danda was talking with Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris, so narrator felt that one little girl is hiding behind the settee, means sofa. So narrator called her. Narrator called the little girl. Narrator smiled at her and called her. But the little girl was behaving timidly, means not normal behavior with the narrator, and she did not come to the narrator. Narrator asked her name. What is your name? Narrator asked her. But then also the girl became immediately self conscious and she started crying and run away. So a narrator felt very bad, and when narrator looked at Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris, so Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris were also looking so sad. And Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris, they said sorry to Mr. Danda,
સર
to the narrator.
મેં
Yes? Any doubt? Hello? Any doubt? Any doubt? Okay. So here, Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris, they were so sad and they said sorry to Mr. Danda, means narrator name, Mr. Danda. Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris said that our daughter is deaf and dumb. Now, name of the daughter is Pramodini. Name of the girl is Pramodini, and Pramodini was deaf and dumb. So Mr. and Mrs. Bandari said, our daughter Pramodini is deaf and dumb. That's why she did not come to you. So here Mr. Danda means narrator felt very bad, and narrator realized that because of him, Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris are sad. So here narrator gave one suggestion. Narrator gave one suggestion to Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris. Narrator said that take some chits, take some bits of paper, means chits, and write this message that our daughter is deaf and dumb. Don't call my daughter directly. Please give her time to come to you, and please do this. So in the chit, this message narrator has written, and the chit properly managed and packed in one cover. And narrator said to Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris that when any new guest come to the guest house, hand over this chit, this cover to the new guest. And after reading this chit, the guest will understand and they will not call Pramodini directly. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris have done, they have packed the chit in cover and the idea work well. Okay, this paragraph now. The idea work well means narrator's idea work well, even beyond our expectation. Means Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris, they thought that this idea will not work, but the idea work well, and Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari is now so relaxed about Pramodini, because now no need to tell sorry to any guest about Pramodini, and guest now, after reading the chit, they also understood or understand very well that Pramodini is deaf and dumb. Though a few sympathetic questions were still put to the parents, but sometimes in private guest, what happened that sometimes some visitors may not able to understand. So Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris have to answer some parents, because some visitors, that when visitors do not understand, then in that case Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris explain to the new visitor. But generally new visitor, whatever who come to the guest house, the new visitor directly understood that Pramodni is deaf and dumb. Later, the girl slowly began to be friendly with many of the guests. Now, this idea worked very well, and Pramodni also now began to be friendly. Means now friendly behavior with many guests, because now guests, after reading the chit, guests also understood that Pramodni is deaf and dumb. So guests were not calling Pramodni directly. But after some time and slowly, guests may call Pramodni, and now Pramodni's behavior totally changed. Now friendly behavior. The Bhandaris felt relieved, and Pramodni's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris, now they felt relieved. Relieved means relaxed. Now without tension, now no any tension of Pramodni, and thought that at least one of their problems was temporarily solved. And Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris thought that now our main problem is solved. Which problem? So that problem here is, they have to, before the chit idea, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris used to tell all the visitors that our daughter is deaf and dumb, our daughter is deaf and dumb. But now after hand over the chit, now that problem is solved. But they had a strange visitor one day. But one day what happened? One strange visitor arrived. Strange means unknown visitor. One day one visitor arrived to the guest house. It was late in the afternoon and I was talking to the landlord about some packed lunch that I needed the next day. Now, narrator, it was late in the afternoon and I was talking to the landlord. Means afternoon time was there and narrator was talking to the landlord, means Mr. Bhandari. And narrator was asking him to pack some lunch, because narrator was planning a short excursion. Excursion means like picnic. So narrator was planning to go on a picnic. So that's why narrator was talking to the Bhandari, talking to Mr. Bhandari about lunch. But Mr. Bhandari was so busy. The landlord was in a hurry. Hurry means he was so busy, Mr. Bhandari, arranging things for a new guest who had booked a room for the season and was supposed to be moving in any moment. And when narrator asked Mr. Bhandari that why are you so busy? So Mr. Bhandari said, today new guest is going to come, and that's why I am preparing, I am doing arrangement for the new guest. And the new guest can come by any time by the mail train. Mail train means fast train or courier train. The new guest will come at any time. That's why I am in a hurry, means I do not have time to talk with you. A young man, barely 25, came in, a porter carrying his luggage. Now, new guest has come, new visitor, new guest has come to Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari's guest house. And the new visitor's age was around 25 years. And young man, 25 years, a porter carrying his luggage. He was coming and he was coming with a porter. Porter means a person who carries our luggage, suitcase. So when the guest was coming, a porter was carrying his luggage. Because of the journey, he looked untidy, his hair, his necktie, his shoes, all unkempt and needing attention. And because of journey, the new visitor looked untidy. Untidy means so dirty. His hair, his necktie means neck part. His shoes all looking dirty, unkempt. Unkempt means all looking dirty. But he had a cheerful face and jet black eyes sparkling with vitality. But the new visitor had a cheerful face. Cheerful means happy face. Smile was there on his face, and his jet black eyes sparkling means shining with vitality. His eyes were shining with vitality means with enthusiasm, means so excited. Mr. Bhandari stepped forward and asked, Mr. David, I presume. Now, when new guest entered into the guest house, so Mr. Bhandari stepped forward. Mr. Bhandari goes towards the new visitor and asks him, are you Mr. David? I presume means I understand. I know you are Mr. David, our new guest. The young man looked closely at his face, smiled and nodded. And the new visitor looked closely at Mr. Bhandari, and then young visitor means the new visitor smiled at the narrator, smiled at Mr. Bhandari and nodded his head. Nodded means moving his head, means said yes with head, not by mouth. Nodded means moving head up and down, moving our face up and down. Room number 18, please, everything is ready. Then Mr. Bhandari said, your room number is 18 and everything is ready. Means your room is well managed, well maintained, and everything is okay in your room. You can go to your room. The young man again looked at him, smiled and nodded. Second time, the new visitor looked at Mr. Bhandari, smiled at him, and nodded, means said yes with head. Okay, with giving sign yes, yes or no by head, not by mouth. The young man gave me a brief, friendly look and sat before a huge book which the landlord had pushed before him, making the necessary entries about himself and his intended stay. Now, the new visitor looked friendly, very friendly behavior, and he was sitting before a huge book, means in the reception, near reception counter on sofa. The new visitor sat on the sofa, and one big book, huge means big book, was there on the table. And then the new visitor takes the book and writes entries about himself. Entries means his coming date and leaving date in the register. At this time, he discovered the seal envelope containing the type sheet lying on the table. And when the new visitor was writing in the register, he found the envelope. Envelope means that cover. Which cover? A cover in which the message was written. Which message? Mr. Bhandari has written that our daughter is deaf and dumb. That message. The type sheet lying on the table addressed to him by name. Now, new visitor, Mr. David. Mr. David takes that envelope cover and he tore it open. Means he opens the cover and takes the chit. He opens the chit and now he tries to read the message. This coincided with the entry of landlady into the room. Now, when Mr. David was reading the chit, Mrs. Bhandari arrived. Means Mrs. Bhandari came. She hurriedly asked her husband if this was the new guest, and having received confirmation, came forward and shook hands with the young man. And Mrs. Bhandari asked her husband, Mr. Bhandari, that is this a new guest, Mr. David? Mr. Bhandari said, yes, yes, he is our new guest, Mr. David. And then Mrs. Bhandari came forward, means she comes towards Mr. David and said, hello, Mr. David, hello. Did you have a nice journey, Mr. David? She asked with a sweet smile. And Mrs. Bhandari asked a question to Mr. David. Did you have a nice journey? Means in a journey, any problem? The young man smiled and nodded. But the new visitor, Mr. David, smiled at Mrs. Bhandari and nodded. Means moved the head. Would you like to have a hot bath immediately or tea first? Now again, Mrs. Bhandari asked question to Mr. David that would you like to have hot bath, means do you want hot water for bathing or do you want to drink tea first? The young man pursed his lips and shrugged his shoulders. But the young man just moved his lips and shrugged his shoulders, and then new visitor put his hands on his shoulders and rubbing his shoulders, implying that one would be as good as other and he had no preferences. And new visitor was trying to say that I want to take bath. I want to take bath. But both the landlord and landlady were by now slightly disconcerted by the guest as he had not even deigned to reply adequately to their polite inquiries. And here Mr. and Mrs. Bandaris are confused. They confused that why new visitor Mr. David is not speaking anything. Why Mr. David is only showing signs, showing why Mr. David is doing only acting, not speaking anything. And after reading, Mr. David has read the chit, the message about Pramodni, and but no any reply. So now Mr. and Mrs. Bandari is confused that why the new guest is not giving answer. What is the problem? What's wrong with him? The young man meanwhile took out the typed chit and started reading it. As soon as he had gone through it, he looked around astonished. The little girl Pramodni was at the moment playing in the courtyard. Now, Mr. David, he is reading. He started reading the message, the chit. And after reading, he had gone through it, he looked around and astonished. After completed the message, after completed reading, now Mr. David looked around in astonish. Astonish means in surprise, he looked around. The little girl Pramodni was at the moment playing in the courtyard. At that time, Pramodni was playing in the courtyard, in the ground. We could see her sitting near the flower beds. As here, Pramodni was playing in the courtyard, in the garden, and just we could see her sitting near the flower beds. Pramodni was sitting near the flower beds. But here you see in the picture, the young man looked at all of us with a smile and darted out towards her. Mr. David looked at all, means Mr. Bandari, Mrs. Bandari, and narrator Mr. Danda. And then young man smiled and darted out towards her. Darted means search, quick movement, search out towards her means search out Pramodni. Her means here Pramodni. Now this is very strange. Mrs. Bandari cried out in protest, how rude he is. Now when Mrs. Bandari saw that the new visitor, Mr. David, is going towards my daughter Pramodni. So Mrs. Bandari here said, this person, this visitor is very rude. Rude means very bad. Mr. David is very rude visitor because after reading the chit, he may not supposed to go to Pramodni, but Mr. David did not follow our request. Mr. David did not follow our request. He should not have ignored our request like this. The landlord put in more mildly. And then Mr. Bandari said, Mr. and Mrs. Bandari said, Mr. David should not ignore our request. Mr. David ignored our request, did not look at our request. And landlord put in more mildly means not showing any strong feelings. I too was bit upset. I means here Mr. Danda, narrator, was also bit upset, means sad that the new visitor has not followed the instructions. For it was obvious that our effort to save Pramodni's embarrassment from strangers was going to fail in this instance. And narrator Mr. Danda said, in this case, in this new visitor case, my idea is fail. My idea does not work because the new visitor has not implemented this idea. And Pramodni's embarrassment. Embarrassment means feeling shame. Narrator wanted to save Pramodni to feel shame from strangers. But in this case, what happened? The new visitor did not listen, and new visitor goes towards Pramodni. After a few moments, as we all walk out to the veranda, the scene that confronted us was something we least expected to see. But after a few moments, what happened? We all walk out to the veranda. Veranda means like balcony. When Mr. and Mrs. Bhandari and narrator Mr. Danda, they all come to the veranda, to the balcony. What happened? They saw that the strange young man, means Mr. David, was reclining on the grassy ground and Pramodni was sitting on his lap. He was showing her the flowers. What happened? Here Pramodni was sitting on Mr. David's lap. Lap means which part? Lap means which part? Do you know? Give answer, please.
Sir?
Lap, lap. Sitting on his lap means what?
Sir?
Yes.
Sir? Sir, my charging મારામાં નથી ને એટલે મારી પ્રેઝન્ટ ભૂલાઈ ગઈ 44 રોલ નંબર.
Yes. Give answer,
Thank
please.
you,
What
sir.
is the meaning
Sir,
of
મારી
lap?
પ્રેઝન્ટ ભૂલાઈ ગઈ.
Yes. What is the meaning of lap? Pramodni was sitting on his lap.
સર લેપ એટલે હાથ પકડીને હાલવે.
No, no, no. Sitting on his lap. Do you hear the word laptop?
ખોળામાં બેઠે છે ખોળામાં.
Ah, right. We keep laptop where? Okay, lap and top. That is lap. Okay. So Pramodni was sitting on Mr. David's lap. Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris are surprised. What is this? Here, Mr. David, we were thinking that Mr. David is a bad person, but Mr. David is a good person. He was showing her flowers. Mr. David was showing flowers to Pramodni. And suddenly, like the sound of gun exploding, the shrill animal-like laughter of Pramodni pierced the air. And suddenly what happened? Pramodni, like a gun sound, like a bullet sound, shrill means loud voice, loud, with loud noise, like animal. Pramodni started laughing. Pramodni started laughing like an animal. And first time she laughed like this. The parents look at each other with wonder and amazement. And Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris were totally surprised. They look at each other with wonder, with surprise. That what is this here? How is this happen? Our daughter has not laughed like this for years, means many years have passed. Our daughter has not laughed like this. And today what happened? Curious, we watched the two of them who are now walking hand in hand. And curious means in excitement, Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris and narrator Mr. Danda watch Mr. David and Pramodni. Now they both are walking and hand in hand. Means Pramodni's hand in Mr. David's hand. They both are holding their hands and walking. Pramodni then ran to her mother and danced about her with joy. Now Pramodni comes to her mother and dance with joy. Joy means with happiness. Now Pramodni is so happy. She made her queer sounds of ma, 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 and wildly pointed to the young man. And now, queer sound. Queer means what? Strange sound, unknown sound. First time Pramodni spoke these words, ma, ma, and wildly pointed to the young man. And then Pramodni pointed to the young man David. It was Mr. David who came to a rescue. Rescue means to save. And then Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris realized that Mr. David is the man who came to save our daughter Pramodni. And we soon realized that he was deaf and dumb too. And then Mr. and Mrs. Bhandaris knew that Mr. David is also deaf and dumb. Like Pramodni, Mr. David was also deaf and dumb, means not able to hear and not able to speak. Now, these two paragraphs in the next lecture, okay? Now, only two paragraphs are remaining. Okay? Understood the story or not?
Understood.
Okay.
Understood. Wow.
Okay. Those who have written names in chat box, they can leave, okay?
Bye bye, sir. Khudafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.
Sir Khudafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.